Look, this was 1989. It was even before the Berlin Wall fell, but Hungary had cut the barbed wire. So that was the beginning of the end in 1989 of the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. And this young guy said, I'm going to make a political party and I'm going to be a leader and I'm going to make a new Hungary. And what he showed was vision that, look, we're a great country. We've been held back for the last 45 years. I'm going to help lead the way. And it was Fidesz, Young Democrats, I think was the translation of it. And he just had the idea, we're going to move forward. He was a kid, and we're all kids then. You could see that there was energy, vision, foresight, and it proved right.
Yeah, and a toughness. So you heard his analysis, I think, of where we are with the war in Ukraine, election of Trump, on the basis, in part, of his promise to try to end this if he can. You saw the new Secretary of Defense say, no, we're not going to support Ukraine's entry into NATO. Where are we now?
Yesterday was the most important day for peace in maybe decades, actually. This war in Ukraine resulted from a very bad idea of the United States taken in 1994. It's a project. The project was a project to expand NATO forever, anywhere. Just keep moving east. Keep moving not only to the first wave, which was the Prime Minister's country, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, but then move eastward, closer to the former Soviet Union, into the former Soviet Union, surround Russia in the Black Sea region, go all the way to a little country in the South Caucasus, Georgia. It was mind-boggling. Clinton signed on to that in 1994. It became what we call the deep state project, meaning it didn't really matter who the president was. Each president would come and basically would be informed. NATO's moving eastward, you're part of that process. So Clinton started it in 1994. And as Prime Minister Orban said, he mentioned briefly, in 1990, on February 9th, 1990, in unequivocal, clear as can be terms, the United States had said to President Mikhail Gorbachev, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. And if you have any doubt about it, all the documents are now online, available. You can scrutinize everything. Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the German foreign minister, said the same thing, same day. He's on tape actually explaining, no, I don't just mean within Eastern Germany, I mean anywhere to the east. Clinton, being Clinton, and the U.S. deep state, being the U.S. deep state, started this project in 1994. They already had the idea, by the way, in 1991, 92, as soon as the Soviet Union ended. Aha, now we move. Now we move eastward. Now we control everything. Now we are the sole superpower. So this has gone on for 30 years. And each president got into it. Under George Bush Jr., 7 more countries were added: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Bulgaria, and Romania in 2004. Then in 2007, President Putin said at the summit that's taking place right now, the Munich Security Summit, said, stop. You told us no expansion, not an eastward expansion, even an inch, you said. You've now done 10 countries. Stop. Perfectly reasonable. Stop. I don't think our president, Donald Trump, would much like to see China and Russia building their military bases up from Central America. This was how the Russians saw this. Why are you coming to our border when you told us you weren't going to move? And there was one other thing that was very important in this, which is probably the most decisive thing and almost not even recognized. In 2002, the U.S. did something really, really, really destabilizing. And that is it unilaterally left the anti-ballistic missile treaty. That was a core strategy to stop a nuclear war between the two superpowers, because what ABM had done for 30 years was to say, we each have deterrence. If you strike us, we can strike back. We'll limit our anti-ballistic missiles so that both sides maintain deterrence. In 2002, the United States unilaterally, unprovoked, walked out of ABM, said, no, we're not going to do it anymore. We're going to put anti-ballistic missile systems into Russia's bordering territories. The Russians said, are you kidding? The U.S. said, what's your problem? We do what we want. So in 2007, Putin said, stop already. In 2008, George Bush Jr. doubled down, as Americans typically do, and said, okay, now we're moving to Ukraine and to Georgia. That was why this war occurred. But Ukraine had one more sliver of life, and that was that they elected a president in 2010 that didn't want to be part of NATO. And the public didn't want to be part of NATO. Why? Because they knew this is very dangerous. Why get into this provocative situation? His name was Viktor Yanukovych. Americans don't like neutrality, but Yanukovych was trying to be neutral between the two sides, and the U.S. played a rather unfortunate role on February 22nd, 2014, in a violent overthrow of this person. And that's when the war started. And it's been now 10 years, and no president has told the truth until yesterday, by the way. Yesterday is a historic day because a call took place between President Putin and President Trump. It was the first call. We don't know if there had been a short call beforehand between the two of them, but there was no call by Biden and Putin. With war going on for 3 years, no call. And now there was a call, and the readout from the American side was excellent. What President Trump said in the call was, we respect Russia. We hear Russia's concerns. We fought on the same side in World War II. Nice point, by the way. True. Soviet Union lost 27 million people in World War II and was an ally of the United States, a fact that wasn't mentioned for years and years and years by President Biden. And then the defense secretary, Hegseth, the new defense secretary, said yesterday the truth for the first time, that Ukraine is not going to join NATO. This is the basis for peace. This is absolutely the basis for peace. And they couldn't tell the truth for 3 decades. They could not admit what any of us knew, because I've been around this region for 36 years in detail. I sat with Boris Yeltsin. I sat with Mikhail Gorbachev. But the Americans would not tell the truth publicly until yesterday, that this was so provocative. It was a game. They thought they'd win the game. I don't know how many people here play or played in their childhood the game of Risk. The game of Risk was a big game for me. You wanted your piece on every part of the world map. That was the game. When you took over the whole world hegemony, we now call it, you won. They're playing that game until this administration. So the three important things have happened, in my view, in this administration so far. First, our new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, told the fundamental truth. We are in a multipolar world. First time the sentence was uttered, he told the truth. What does it mean? The American mindset for 30 years was we run the show. Marco Rubio said, well, we don't run the show. We live with other powerful countries. Great start. Second and third were the two events yesterday. So I'm feeling about peace that this is really something that happened yesterday. If they follow through, we know what Washington is like. There's every crazy idea swarming still. A project of 30 years doesn't go down necessarily in one phone call or one statement by the Secretary of Defense, but it's pretty important that it was said so publicly and so visibly. And of course, Europe is in a tizzy because Europe signed on to the U.S. project. All these politicians in Europe are there where they are because they were part of the U.S. project. And now the U.S. is reversing its project. And you didn't tell us, and what are we supposed to do? We're way out there. And so they're completely befuddled. And I have to say, I told them personally, many of these leaders, and I mean personally, one by one, for years, you are going to get trapped this way because this project doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It's a game for the Americans, but it's life and death for the Russians. So it cannot be won by the American side. It's impossible. And I tried to tell them, and nobody in Europe either had the clarity or the guts to see it, except the person that preceded me in this seat, Prime Minister Orban, because he was completely clear about this from the first day. Now others are starting, but even till today, the Europeans can't get it because they're so deeply invested in something that makes no sense. They should have said, Russia's big, it lives near us, let's cooperate. That's how you do it.
Your online activity is being watched, and not just certain things you search on your private browser. Everything is being watched. Shady big tech companies are constantly hawking your information because their profits depend on it. They get rich by invading your privacy, then selling your data to anybody who's willing to pay for it. It's scary, and people need a way to escape from its grasp, and that's where ExpressVPN comes in. With ExpressVPN, 100% of your online activity is rerouted through secure, encrypted servers, making it impossible for data brokers to see what you do online or buy and sell that information. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world where companies will do anything to invade your privacy, and they're doing it right now. ExpressVPN is a way to shield what is sacred to you from rapacious data brokers. Right now, you get an extra 4 months for free when you use this show's special link. Go to expressvpn.com/Tucker. We recommend it.
I think one of the reasons we wound up in this position, we meaning the United States, but also Europe, is there's a habit of speech which reflects a habit of mind, which is an unwillingness to engage with ideas and instead resort immediately to attacking the other person on the basis of motive. And you saw this with Orban, you're a Russian stooge or whatever, and it was especially hilarious as he explained, he's the opposite of a Russian stooge, of course, lifelong. This country was occupied by the Russians. But you do see it also in the United States, and it makes it kind of impossible to have a rational conversation about any. I know you've been the butt of this too, not whining about it, but it's like, is there even a culture in our foreign policy establishment of having rational conversations to the point where we can solve problems like this?
You know, we've talked about, I think, an uncle of yours who's one of my favorite politicians of American history, J. William Fulbright. And he wrote a book in the 1960s called The Arrogance of Power. And I was a kid then, and I read that book like it was the coolest thing imaginable. This was the chairman of the U.S. Foreign Relations Committee saying, we're too arrogant to think clearly. That was amazing. He was an amazing person. Now, I think that's the fundamental problem. I'm not sure we're properly over it, but I have to say that in 1990-91, we had the chance for global peace, really for global peace. That doomsday clock of the atomic scientists, which I like to refer to so much, which measures how close or far are we from nuclear war, was the farthest away it was ever in its history because the Cold War had ended. So I was there as a young economist who actually knew something about economic stabilization, and I made proposals. And interestingly, just as a footnote, I advised the Polish government in 1989. Long story, but suddenly as a kid, I happened to be there and I helped write their plan. And everything I recommended for Poland was immediately accepted by the White House. It was a very odd thing. In fact, I went one day, I had an idea of mobilizing some finance to help Poland stabilize. And I called the Polish finance minister, said, do you mind if I try to raise $1 billion for you today, which was a lot of money in those days. And he said, if you raise $1 billion, that would be great. So I called Bob Dole, our Senate Majority Leader, whom I knew because of the Poland work that I was doing. And he invited me immediately into his office. And he said, come back in an hour. So I came back in an hour. This was September 1989. And who was sitting there? General Brent Scowcroft. Oh, okay, he was the general who was our national security advisor. I was a kid. So it was a little bit interesting moment. And Senator Dole said to me, explain to General Scowcroft your idea. So I handed him the paper, and this is how you do financial stabilization, and here's how you stabilize the currency. And Scowcroft looked at it and said, well, will this work? And I said, General, this will work. And Dole led me out of the office and said, call me back later in the day. So at 5 p.m. I called, and Dole said, the White House has called. Tell your friends you have the $1 billion. So I raised $1 billion that day. It was good. No. It had nothing to do with me because it was the right idea. The Polish zloty stabilized. I did a good thing. I was a technically equipped, sophisticated manager of a financial stabilization, or not manager, but advisor on the financial stabilization. Okay. Then in 1991, I recommended the same thing for Gorbachev and for this creaking, collapsing Soviet Union. Gorbachev wanted to have elections in all of the republics, and he wanted to democratize and stabilize. So, okay, I know something about that, Mr. President. And so we met in the Harvard Kennedy School. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us, a little team. One of them was the chief economic advisor of Gorbachev, Grigory Yavlinsky. One was the dean of the Kennedy School. One became a very senior diplomat, Bob Blackwell, that I deal with. One was a very senior economist at MIT, Stanley Fisher. We wrote a plan for how the Soviet Union could stabilize, and I did the chapter on the financing, basically the same thing that I had said for Poland. Okay. It was completely rejected within about 12 hours in Washington. Okay. I hated this for the next 30 years, I have to tell you, because we just could not take yes for an answer. A couple of months ago, someone sent me from the archives, the first time that I'd ever seen it, the National Security Council minutes rejecting the proposal. Fascinating to read, because that's your life before your eyes watching this. There was a guy named Dick Darman who was a former colleague of mine. The technical term, I don't think I can say it in mixed company, actually, so I won't say what I would say about him.
But it's an unpleasant English word.
It's really nasty. Too nasty for polite company. He says in this thing, we should do the minimum necessary so that there's not a collapse, but nothing more. And he quotes Machiavelli, and we're not interested, and we're not going to do this. And it's really watching stupid people taking important, stupid decisions. Fools. By the way, they never called to say, can we discuss stabilization? This guy knew nothing. They don't understand anything. They don't care. So what were they doing? They actually reached a conclusion at the end of the meeting. We're going to do the minimum possible. I mean, minimum. It's not our business to help. We're not going to do any of that. That's arrogance of power. We don't have to do anything. Why? We're the United States. We don't have to do anything. They didn't even, look, the stakes for the world were very high. You could have a 30-minute phone call to understand financial stabilization. You could say, in history, when countries are destabilized this way, here's how stability has worked. That was my specialty. That's what I knew and taught at Harvard and knew a lot about. But they're so arrogant that it's not even to discuss for a half an hour any of this. And they didn't. And they took a terrible decision. And by the way, my point is not that that led on to this and this and this. No. They took terrible decisions for the next 35 years. This could have been stopped at any moment. Not one thing led to the next thing. No. One stupid decision, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. You have to learn to behave. The way you behave in this world is mutual respect. The way you behave is thinking you're not going to be more secure if they're completely destabilized. That's what you have to understand. And that is not so hard to understand. We teach it to our kids. At age 4, we start teaching that. And then suddenly, if you want your passport to Washington, you have to forget it at age 40 or something. And that's how they behave. So that's my feeling about this, that it's just a kind of arrogance. And you can see it in this writing, which I find fascinating to go back and watch this tragedy unfold. 1997, another wonderful moment if you want to just watch hubris and tragedy. Very good book. Good in that it's insightful. Terrible book in that it's all wrong, by Zbigniew Brzezinski. And many of you have probably read it, called The Grand Chessboard. And he could have called it The Game of Risk. It would have been a little bit more accurate. But it was about how to make American dominance in the world. And he has a chapter about expanding NATO to Ukraine. Exactly that. And he talks about Europe and NATO expanding eastward. And the question that he asks in 1997 is, what can the Russians do about it? Because they're weak. And he answers meticulously. He considers, would Russia ever ally with China? Impossible, he considers.
That'll never happen.
That'll never happen. Could Russia ever ally with Iran? No, impossible. That will never happen. So you watch, like we watch now, ChatGPT thinking out loud. It's all there. It's all wrong. And it was all American policy for the next 25 years. That's tragedy.